Formula One is a young man's game. Although some drivers hang in there for decades, the youngsters are just too quick. A new generation of talent has opened the door to some of the drivers Formula One has ever seen. And if Mercedes can get on top of their car issues, it would be their own prodigy, George Russell, that wins the 2022 season. How is Russell better than his rival, Charles Leclerc? And is he really getting all the performance he can out of the Mercedes W13? Stay tuned to find out. We tend to forget that once upon a time, Formula One drivers were fanboys just like us. Growing up, George Russell was obsessed. He had all the merchandise and was driving and karting in the hopes of making it to the big stage one day. When he met reigning world champion Lewis Hamilton in 2009, he said it was like meeting a superhero. Now, 3 years later, he's driving alongside that superhero at Mercedes. He achieved every young driver's dream and seemed to pull it off without a hitch. When he was 19, it was announced that Russell will be joining the Mercedes-AMG F1 Young Driver Program. At the time, team boss Toto Wolff said that they had been keeping a close eye on Russell and that he could have a long career ahead of him if he played his cards right. He had a couple of aces to play. That year, he went on to win the GP3 Series, and the next year, he won the FIA Formula 2 Championship. Both of these competitions are viewed as important stepping stones to Formula One. George had certainly done enough, but the only team where Mercedes were able to secure him a spot was Williams. He didn't score any points in his first year, but he still managed some impressive results, considering he was in the slowest car. Things started to turn around a couple of years later, and in the 2021, he achieved some breathtaking results. In Hungary, he had his highest career finish in 8th place, but that was nothing compared to the next race in Belgium, where after a wet qualifying and a red flag race, George finished in 2nd place. And that was in a Williams car. Next, the Mercedes team. Don't we always want what we can't have? Sometimes getting what we want is not what we imagine. George may have been feeling the same way about Mercedes. He dreamed of getting the opportunity to drive at Silver Arrow for years. In the turbo hybrid era, Mercedes were totally dominant. They won virtually every race and had the Constructors' Championship tied up by the middle of each season. That's what George would have been thinking about when he signed with Mercedes as a reserve driver in 2018. It was the Formula One seat that every driver in motorsport was dreaming of. He probably already started building a trophy room at his house for all his future wins. But it wasn't meant to be. The year that Russell was promoted has been the biggest fall in Mercedes history. From Mercedes front row lockouts to fighting out for 5th place with Haas cars, it's been a big fall from grace. Just last year, they were finishing more than a lap in front of the Haas cars. But in Saudi Arabia, Hamilton was fighting with the Haas of Kevin Magnussen. Even worse, he lost. Hamilton barely finished in a point-scoring position in 10th place, while Magnussen finished in 9th place. But anything good in life you have to work for, George. What happened when George Russell raced against Charles Leclerc in Formula 3, and what caused George to almost punch Valtteri Bottas? Don't go anywhere because all of this is coming right up. Formula One world champions will do whatever it takes to win. But what about George? Does he have the killer instinct? At the 2021 Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, he had a big crash with his biggest rival. Russell was still waiting for the call-up to Mercedes and trying to prove himself worth it, and the man standing in his way was clearly Valtteri Bottas. When Russell was tailing Bottas on the 31st lap of the race, he'd only one thing in his mind. He was going to overtake him in the slower Williams and prove to everyone that he deserves that seat more than Bottas. But things didn't exactly go as planned. On a circuit that was still drying, there was not much room for error, and George went for an ambitious move around the outside of the Mercedes. One of his tires touched the slippery grass on the way past, and it was enough to send his Williams spinning into Bottas and sent them both slamming into the barriers at over 200 kilometers per hour. Bottas was still recovering when Russell jumped out of his car and confronted him. George slapped Bottas's helmet and even appeared to throw a piece of the car at him. After the crash, he hadn't calmed down either. He said that Bottas had only defended so hard because of Russell, who was already rumored to be replacing Bottas the following year. But later on, after he had calmed down, he admitted to being partly at fault and he shared the blame for the incident. So don't be fooled by the British gentleman presentation. George Russell is hungry to win at all costs. Already proven himself. When George Russell got his first chance to drive a Mercedes, he turned some heads in the paddock. It was at the 2020 Sakura Grand Prix in Bahrain, and it was the second last round of the calendar. Lucky for George, then, that it was the reserve driver for Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton had tested positive for the coronavirus the week before the race. race. That meant that he wasn't allowed to enter the race, and the reserve driver stepped up. Russell could barely contain his excitement. Hamilton had already won that year's World Championship, and so he would literally be driving a championship-winning car. It was the best car on the grid, and if George couldn't perform with his Mercedes, he might not be as good as he thought. Along came the race, and he lost out on pole by 2/10 to his teammate Bottas, but he more than made up for it at the beginning of the race. He pulled out ahead of Bottas and started to build a lead. When a virtual safety car was called on lap 61, Russell was called into the pits along with his teammate, but a rare mistake by the world champion constructors meant that Russell's car was given the wrong tires. He was forced to pit again to correct the mistake, and by the time he got back out, he was down into 5th position. But Russell proved what kind of stuff he's made of. He overtook 3 cars ahead of him until he was in 2nd place, eyeing up Perez ahead of him. But the race gods had other ideas, and Russell suffered a tire puncture, causing him to pit again. He finished the race in 9th place, miles away from where he expected. But he had earned the respect of the Mercedes team, up there with Charles and Max. To get the Mercedes seat is one thing, but now he has to fight against 2 other drivers from his generation. Max Verstappen was a true prodigy. He dominated the karting world and was given a spot with Toro Rosso after he stunned them all with his quick testing times. He was so good that he skipped Formula 2. Charles Leclerc didn't have that opportunity. He raced in Formula Renault 2.0 before winning the GP3 series and the Formula 2 championship in back-to-back years. And George Russell followed and was just a year behind Leclerc. But they did race against each other once before. In the 2015 Formula 3 European Championship, neither of them won the season, but Charles came in 4th place while George finished in 6th place. Leclerc won 5 races that season, and Russell's best finish was 2nd place. Russell was trying to secure a seat that season with the dominant Prema Power team, but was apparently pushed out by future F1 rival Lance Stroll and his billionaire father. He was instead competing with the Carlin team, who are known to develop some of Formula One's greatest talents, and whatever they taught him paid off because George went on to finish 3rd in F3 the next year before winning both the GP3 series and F2. In his short career in Formula One, we haven't seen him go head-to-head with Leclerc or Verstappen yet. He just hasn't had the machinery. But if Mercedes can catch up to Red Bull and Ferrari, there's no doubt that he can challenge for race wins. Do you think Russell is a future world champion, or did he arrive at Mercedes at just the wrong time? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.